Today we're talking about maximizing CFO productivity, a client side and a vendor side perspective. And on the call we've got myself, Todd Gimpton. I'm principal of a NetSuite managed services business called Etter+Ramli, and we've got Dominic Reed from Zone & Co, a leading tools provider for the NetSuite community. We're going to put up our details later on if you'd like to get in contact with us. Dominic, why don't you take it over? Give us a little bit of a background of Zone & Co so everyone knows what we're talking about, and we can move forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Todd, and thanks everybody for joining. Yeah, excited for this conversation. So actually, Zone has got a very interesting background because we've come from, being a customer, being a partner, and now to a software provider. So Zone & Co was born out of a company that actually IPO'd on NetSuite. So they implemented NetSuite and they IPO'd on the platform. And a couple of guys there decided actually we want to actually be more involved in the NetSuite ecosystem. So they created an organization called Zone & Co, which was initially started as an alliance partner to implement NetSuite and really optimize people's NetSuites. And what they found is they found the power of the platform through that process, and found themselves developing lead to revenue solutions for customers. And then they found out actually we could actually build a product, okay? And that's again the power of the NetSuite platform. So I actually built a product called Zone Billing natively inside of the four walls of NetSuite. That was really a gap in the market at the time, and Insight Partners came along and saw the potential in the company of how we could actually be a much wider product set to the NetSuite ecosystem. So they came along and made an investment in us and allowed us to acquire some other businesses, which you can see on the screen. I won't go through them all, to allow us to broaden our offering to the NetSuite market, and also allowed us to build other solutions inside that area. So to summarize, we've been a customer, we've been a partner, and now we're a software vendor. So we've seen both sides of the table a little bit, but not as much as the experience that Todd and his organization have. So that's a bit about who we are. This means that what the kind of company we are. We're an organization with over 2,000 customers globally, supported by 270 employees in 25 countries. And part of our go-to-market strategy is through partners, and we have around 100 partners and actually 10 suite apps that sit on the NetSuite platform. Now, who are we and what's our mission, really? Our mission is to make the use of NetSuite more of a pleasurable experience for the finance teams at the end of the day. We want to make the finance teams' jobs easier, okay? And we do that by building native suite apps on the NetSuite platform. So just to cover what we mean by that and why we took that decision. So within the NetSuite ecosystem, you have a couple of options, okay, for enhancing NetSuite. You can go out and build your own platform and integrate it into that platform, which is quite valid as well in certain occasions. Or you can decide to build inside of the four walls of NetSuite, and that's our strategy that we took, was to build inside the four walls of NetSuite. There's a number of reasons for that. When you've invested in NetSuite, often you've invested because you've got your whole finance function inside of NetSuite in one system, which means you don't have to log into another system to use it, and you don't have to learn a new system. Another area is, most organizations will have done their due diligence on the security of the Oracle NetSuite platform. With us being inside of the four walls of NetSuite, it means you don't have to do that again to use our solutions. You've already done that with NetSuite, and we're right inside of there. A unified database, very important as well. Because we work off the NetSuite database, you don't have to worry about any data integrity issues between the other systems that you might be using outside. And the last point really leads into the others. Because we're not having to do all this integration work, our solutions can be implemented much quicker and more efficiently than perhaps something outside. So that's why we took that decision. So this gives us essentially a suite of apps for the office of the CFO. Okay, so Zone billing is really for organizations that have complex billing and revenue needs. I touched on it on previous slide, but if you're an organization that's doing a lot of usage-based billing or complex-based billing, we help with that. Zone approvals, that's our application for actually allowing a business user to create approval workflows and maintain approval workflows flows in NetSuite. Zone capture, that's our solution for really bringing all your vendor bills and credits into NetSuite using OCR technology. Reconcile, that's for bringing all your bank statements in. Zone payments is for integrating with your payment service providers like Stripe and people like that. Zone reporting is for really capitalizing on that great data set that you've got within NetSuite to put that in the hands of the users so they can use that data in a good way. And then the only one that hasn't yet been branded as Zone something is Infinite Cloud, and that's a recent acquisition we made. And that's really all about managing payroll within the four walls of NetSuite, again, a native suite app. So what does that lead to? Administrative efficiency and streamlined operations, and that's the reason we chose, native suite apps.
Terrific. Thanks for that, Dominic. Good oversight about what Zone & Co does. Incidentally, we're not partnered with Zone & Co. We're independent of that. In fact, it's a good opportunity for me to explain a little bit about the Etter+Ramli business. We engage from the client side, and we've got a fixation on productivity growth within the usage of the platform. So we engage client side. We're a managed service provider. We're not a traditional implementation house. We don't do implementations. We really work aftermarket, and our managed success methodology is really somewhere between a resourcing solution and it's governed by a methodology which we call managed success. We're a modest sized business, but we're looking after a lot of users in 36 countries in the world. We're familiar with all of those jurisdictions, and personally, I existed inside of the NetSuite universe for about 24 years, and everybody on the team is handpicked because they're exceptional at what they do. I spoke before about managed success. It's the amalgamation of these two very core ideas of a managed service focused on customer success, but from a client-side perspective. And that means not just embracing whatever the vendor is telling us we should be doing. It's embracing it from the internal perspective of what really drives business productivity and outcomes. Why is that important? Well, basic truth in life is that the price of these things is not going down. And so if we're not focused on improving productivity and throughput, we're not achieving what we need to at least stand still, because we know those costs are going up. They go up different rates for different people, but sure to go up over time. And so a productivity improvement is always critical to keep front and center. Just to clarify, we're not partnered with NetSuite. We're not partnered with Zone & Co. We don't partner with any vendors in the ecosystem. We work client side, and we're focused on client productivity improvements, and we run customers' accounts all over the world with a focus on productivity. Last slide for me is just to speak about what the success lifecycle looks like, and this is a 4-part process. When we engage with customers, we focus on making sure users know what they're doing and can get what they need done. We then move through an automate stage where we try to automate everything that we can to make processes as efficient as possible, before focusing on compliance to ensure that processes are being done properly and universally, as well as data compliance to make sure we've got as good a quality data set as we can. Once those things are under control, we then talk about business partnering, and that talks really about productivity improvements and really helping users get the most out of the system. So that's the introduction about Dominic and I. We come at it from different perspectives, but driving productivity growth in the NetSuite community is very central to both of our attitudes. Dominic, let's get started on the fireside. So first thing, when do you think it's the right time to get productivity improvements done?
Yeah, I think from a return on investment for a customer, the best time to do this is in that business partnering stage that you mentioned. Okay, so that's your version of business partnering. Okay, so we often see that we partner up with a business that perhaps has something more core and operational that they need to add to the NetSuite stack that they have. For example, an organization that does complex billing may actually want to partner with us. You know, this is not necessarily going to create possibly growth and productivity on top, but it would on top of what NetSuite can do out of the box, right? So I would say that yes, you know, the best time to add some of our solutions and create that sort of growth and productivity for the customer would be at that business partnering stage. But when it's something really core to their operations, then we may partner with them at an earlier stage than what you mentioned. But that was really the only time we would think of that. I guess there's one other caveat to that as well, actually, is when a customer comes from another ERP that has some functionality that maybe NetSuite doesn't do out of the box. And again, that could be another occasion where we may, you know, come into that process before what you would call as your business partnering stage.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're pretty clear that business partnering is about improving productivity, and the supposition there is that everything's working more or less okay at a core system level. To flag your point about billing, I mean, if billing isn't right from day one, then it can become a real problem. If people can hack through it and then you put a billing engine on later on, then that represents an improvement. But the key thing is that regardless, the key focus has to be that the right time to do it is when the foundation is laid well and is laid solid, and Databricks can move on top of that. Yeah,
I agree with that. I think, you know, when I've seen it in the past, not just in the NetSuite ecosystem, but in other ecosystems where too many solutions are thrown in at the same time, that often confuses the client, right? And confuses, and you lose your focus. You know, they may need all of these bricks, so to speak, to build their business, to be fully fully productive, but it's all about the timing. So I couldn't agree more with what you're saying there.
Yeah, we've got war stories on that for sure.
Yeah.
When it comes to productivity improvements, there's often this choice about buying it or building it. As a vendor, I guess you've got a point of view.
You might say that. Yeah, no, I've absolutely got a point of view. You know, I think if the solution you're looking for is available and somebody's already built it and you can buy it, okay, I think often it makes sense to buy the solution rather than build it. I think there's a few risks around building. Okay, one of the risks is scalability. And I think if I go back to billing again, then we do have other solutions, but billing's the best example to look at this. It may make sense to the client to build it now because they'll be able to manage their billing as it stands. Okay, but billing is quite a complex beast as well. So I would say in that scenario, it may be better to buy, because in the long term you're going to maybe do some M&A activity where you buy another business that has a different billing model, or you want to have a different go-to-market, which means you bill your customers in a different way. Perhaps you move from subscription to usage-based billing, for example. So in that occasion, I would really look at the long-term view of your organization and say, hey, where are we going to be in 5 years? Well, is building this the right thing to do now? Because there's a cost base to that as well, right? If you build it. The second thing I wanted to mention on this point was, if you build it, who builds it? And will that person who builds it still be around to support the build as well? You know, so those are a couple of things. Obviously, if it's something really, it would have to be, I feel, something really bespoke, okay, to take the decision to buy, okay, or something really small, perhaps, some scripting, for example, that you might want to do inside of NetSuite. But what we see is, you know, there's not many occasions where something we've built and we're selling on the market doesn't fit the needs of the customers with a little bit of configuration. So that's my view, and it's not a surprising view, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not that different from mine though. I mean, I apply a model on it that's a little bit different, but it's not so different. I mean, basically, I break it up into quadrants, into 4 quadrants, and it talks about complexity and sophistication. And so when if it's highly bespoke, but very strategic for the business, then that typically is a build scenario because it represents an intellectual property development for the business that's very unique for that business. As you move back across and becomes less strategic but complex, that's typically a product area that there would be an off-the-shelf solution for. And so in that situation, there's a real opportunity cost that comes by procuring a product to do certain tasks. You can get a real advantage in time and deployment. When they're less complex and less strategic, we're then in this situation where a small script to go and fix the problem is easy to do, and then where we move across to strategic but not complex as well, it's typically a fairly straightforward process. But you did touch on something interesting, Dominic, which is, well, who's going to build it and what happens when they're not there? Because that happens all the time. And the shortcut when you're building of not having good documentation, having incomplete design, incomplete thought, that will almost always come back and bite people if it's not done properly. And the one that we see all the time is no documentation. And so the learned understanding of the script becomes embedded in the knowledge, but people move, they go, they forget. There's no documentation to support what happens, and 3 years later, everyone's looking at each other saying, "Well, why is this important?" And it seems only really the strategic part, the strategic and the complex ones, really get it, but they're the bits that need it the most. And yet, the system's full of small scripts that do small automations.
Yeah, fair.
Right. So the other consideration is about native or integration. Now, you guys have got a native first approach. I mean, but what's your thoughts?
Absolutely. So when it comes to the finance function, okay, I really think native is the best approach. And I did talk about some of those areas earlier, but the main ones are, we talk about making finance teams' jobs easier. So how we do that is by keeping them in one system to do all of their tasks. Okay. That's really one of the main reasons I think native makes more sense. It's the whole experience of the finance team, how they work with the solution, and of course there are the risks of integration, right? It's another one. If you've got an integration point, you're adding risk to your business because somebody has to manage that integration. Yes, it might be on an iPaaS, like a Celigo or a Boomi or something like that, but somebody still needs to manage that. Okay, so there's the risk there. There's also that risk of data integrity, which I mentioned. So if you're going to run 2 databases, for example, with information that needs to be kept in time, that's one as well. But whilst I say that that native is the best first approach, there is occasions where perhaps the NetSuite platform building inside has some limitations. So it could be limitations around functionality. So just certain things you can't do. Okay, could be limitations around actual volume, for example. So if you're business B2C type organization, so selling to consumers rather than businesses, then you might find that the database can't handle the volume that you're putting through. Okay. Good example of the functional one is that, yes, we have a native first approach, but we do have one solution that's not native, and that's our reporting solution called Zone Reporting. We took the decision with that solution that actually, to really capitalize on the great data and information that's inside of NetSuite and be able to put that in the hands of the finance team, put it in the hands of the board, all of these kind of people, that we felt it would be better to pull that data out, slice and dice that data on another platform, and actually be able to get more from NetSuite that way. So, like I said, native would be we'll always look at native and what we can do, and we'll really push that to the limit. Okay. But there are occasions where actually native is probably not the right approach for people's businesses.
Yeah, I mean, look, mostly I agree, right? But I mean, and leveraging the power of the native is really about keeping users inside of the system rather than taking them outside of the system. There are native users that, there are users that just don't really have a place inside of an ERP or a CRM for that matter. They're doing things that are out of system. As soon as you go into that integration spot, you do create that communications break, and I agree 100% on that. One of the parts about native that I often challenge, particularly within the suite app world, are that there's external vendors that are trying to apply a suite app into the system using a native approach, but their architectural knowledge of the system isn't sufficient to be able to truly embrace the elements properly. And I've reviewed a number of those systems over the years and failed them because they fail to take full linkage of it, or they're trying to run too much in the script and not enough using the data objects of the system. And so this native first, I agree with. But there really is a layer of review to truly understand what that architecture is. Because if you get it wrong, and I've seen it be wrong, they load it up with too many scripts, and that causes a horrible performance on the system. And eventually, you're just running. It's like running your old BMX bike through a muddy puddle. You can just get bogged, and that happens all too often because of poor solution design. How some of these suite apps get certified is a bit beyond me in this area, but that's life. So a little bit of the caveat emptor does apply there, but overall, a native first approach is a good way to keep risk down and put more in the hands of the admin that they can look after it and administrate it properly as part of their core system.
I think when we talk about native suite apps, it's all about the build, how that has been designed and built, right? And it's how much of standard NetSuite objects you mentioned are being used. But it's also another important point, and it's an area we put a lot of investment into, is the user interface. Okay, so we tried to make the user interface as easy on the eye, for one thing, as possible, and secondly, as logical. Okay, so they see the things that are, the finance user sees the things they need to do their job instead of seeing a lot of noise, right? And that's what we try to ensure we do, in the system. So use standard objects as often as possible. Obviously, there's always going to be times where you need to create custom tables, custom fields, and things like this. But where we can use standard objects is definitely the right approach there.
Yeah, you've touched on a great point, and I can't remember where I read it, but I read an article some time ago about user adoption and the stress that gets created with every new application in the mix. And it's funny, even though an application is running inside of NetSuite, it's all considered one environment, and therefore it's a less stressful adoption cycle as well. So you've touched on a great point there. All of this work for productivity. End of the day, some of us are accountants, and so measurement becomes a really important pathway. I mean, I'm interested in your perspective on how is productivity truly measured from a Zone & Co perspective? What's your takeaway there?
Yeah, I think the main things we focus on are, if you think about the finance transactions, okay, the speed in which they can be done and how much of the manual input we take away from that. Okay, that's two areas, because that means the finance team can run quicker. Okay, but also what's a really important part of this is accuracy, and we spend a lot of time and investment in our solution to really drive accuracy in that process. So that in itself actually leads to better customer satisfaction, which is a little bit harder to measure, I would guess, than maybe a financial transaction, and employee satisfaction as well. I think those are the areas, that there's, for all of those things I mentioned, there's an impact on the bottom line. Okay, and I think you may go more granular than me, but that's kind of what we see. And if we look at, for example, zone capture, Okay, so we look at the how much manual process we take out of that sort of finance operation. We see sometimes around the area of 80%, on average around 80% of sort of increased accuracy and 80% of sort of manual transactions were taken out of there. So that's the kind of things we look at.
Yeah, no, fair. I mean, I'm a bit more stats orientated than that. I really break it down into three core components. It's a total cost of ownership, which is the license plus whatever running cost you've got, and that's in total. I then take the active users, not the licensed users, but the active users. And then I take the total volume of transactions, and I matrix those three objects together to derive what the individual stats are. So the TOC to transaction, the TOC to users to transactions, and measure them on a period by period basis. Normally 3 months, half yearly, or a year, but checking in regularly on how that productivity is improving as the business's volume is increasing or decreasing. You can get a bit further into it, but at the end of the day, that really represents the key object for measuring productivity. You touched on something good. You touched on quality, and quality in data is absolutely critical, because at the end of the day, while we're spending all this money on these systems, is because at some point people want to move them from being an operating system into being a strategic information asset, and you can't do that unless your productivity is high, but your data quality is also super high as well. And just to go back to the life cycle slide I put up start, which is why we focus on these three: triage, automate, and compliance, to really hone in on the fact that process and data quality are absolutely critical before tackling these productivity gains, these things that really lift our throughput and lower our total operating costs.
You need to go more granular than me, Todd.
Listen, I mean, Dominic, we've I think the conversation today has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for everyone joining. Whether we come at it from a vendor perspective or from a customer perspective, the objective remains to keep lowering costs, lowering risks, and increasing quality, really at the center of what we're trying to do. And to that end, candidly, I don't think it's a vendor side, and I don't think it's a client side exclusive domain. I think there's a real mixture of both, to really push things forward in a way that adds value. And hopefully the attendees have enjoyed this as well. Hopefully we've shared a few pieces of insight over the years. Incidentally, we're open up for questions. I'm very happy to answer any questions. If anyone's got any, just drop them in the chat. For those who are interested, whether you'd like to talk to Dominic about Zone & Co, or reach out to us and discuss and have a chat about how things are going for you in your environment, I'm really open to it. More than happy to discuss anything. So while we're waiting for some chats, so I'll share a little war story with you, Dominic. So recently we've engaged with a customer, and they've been trying to make their manufacturing work for forever. And I say this because early on you spoke about the need for getting things to be workable, and people taking off too much, they can't get it right, and so they took off everything, and they got lost in this process and too much complexity. And so we simplified it completely back to the basics and got them operating. And for the first time, I just got the word from it today, for the first time this year, they've actually been able to take up cost effectively on their work orders, whereas the whole year they've just been messing around with it. And no disrespect to the team, they've been working hard at it, but they had too many poor instructions about what was important. So that was a great bit of news that came through to me at lunchtime today. Very, very pleased. Very pleased.
Manufacturing is that's a complicated one, right? If you think of the verticals that typically that NetSuite sees people invest in, manufacturing is super complicated. So That's a good job. Well done.
Yeah, so it's in my blood, mate. My great grandfather started a manufacturing business at the turn of the century, and the whole family's been doing it ever since. So anyway, it's all fun, and I really enjoy the opportunity to work with smart people that just want to get ahead, and they're finding themselves encumbered by software that's not doing what it should be doing. Last call for questions. We're there. We're able to take. If no one's got any, then let's wrap it up, Dominic. Thank you everyone for attending. Greatly appreciate the audience. I hope you found it interesting. And like I said, if you'd like to reach out to us in any way, shape, or form, please do. We'd be delighted to have a conversation.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the conversation, Todd.
It's a pleasure, mate.
Conversation, and thanks everybody for taking the time to join today.
Terrific. Thanks very much. We'll see you later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.